we're such a complex thing, and our connection is, to say connection means that there must be separation, right? And when the truth of it is that everything actually is one and there is no separation.
So, hi, Soul Family, and welcome to Haji Hill's YouTube channel. I'm your host, Haji, and this is Amazing STE Stories, the first ever. Our guest today is Elliot. Elliot, welcome to the show. All right, so you ready?
Yes.
Okay, so if you have an introduction, you want anyone to know, the basics about you, you can start with that and then jump straight into your experience.
All right. My name's Elliot. I am father of four beautiful children, husband, my my beautiful wife, and I am a traveler of both time and space in this beautiful universe that we're all a part of. Um, I'm a spiritual guide. Some people say teacher or coach. The names don't really matter, but I'm here at this point, fully realized in uh, my purpose to help us all be awake and evolve to into what we really are, what we're really meant to be. I've had a lot of experiences over my life, starting when I was a kid. Things that I didn't really understand. I didn't understand why other people, kids and adults, didn't have the same experiences. And it really all kind of came to a head about almost 12 years ago. Um, I think I just turned 20. And um, it was basically a rebirth. It happened in the middle of the night. I was in the apartment that I was staying in at the time. It was my sister's apartment out in Boston. And she was gone for the night. And I had been staying with her for a few weeks. I was just kind of lost and confused and just not in a great place mentally, physically, spiritually. And um, I didn't know a whole lot about spirituality. I had grown up in um, kind of like a strict Christian upbringing. Um, Nothing against Christianity, but it didn't make sense to me as a kid, um, and so I didn't really want a whole lot to do with religion or spirituality. And so this one night, um, kind of in the middle of winter, um, I had gone to bed just not feeling good, and I had been feeling good for a long time, like I said, in any kind of way. And I think it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, um, maybe a little earlier than that. I came to, and it was like coming out of a dream, and realizing that for the first time ever, I had this profound thought that I was actually awake, awake to life, and I realized that I was life, and that everyone is life, not just a part of life or alive, but actually life itself. The reason for life itself is us, and and I I barely even understood why I was feeling and thinking this. It almost didn't make sense, except that I had this bubbling up inside of me and literally pouring from me, because it was me. And as confusing as it was, it also made complete sense. And I knew I had to share it with everybody, or at least anyone that would listen, and anyone that could understand, or I could help them understand. Um, One of my favorite quotes of all time. It's by Alan Watts. It was given in one of his most famous lectures. Um, he said that when you're ready to wake up, you're going to wake up. And he meant that kind of spiritual awakening, that realization that we are it, as he would say, or as Buddha said, that we are the awakening, each and every one of us. Our whole experience, our whole purpose. It's just like a flower. A flower will bloom eventually in its own time, and so does each and every one of us bloom into our true being, our true essence. And it's a lifelong purpose and mission for each and every one of us. And that's why we're all here, and that's why I'm here, to be this and know this, and to pass it on to each and every
Oh, wait,
soul.
wait, 1 second, 1 second. You're coming in and out. I don't know if it's just me. Oh gosh, I'm getting concerned about the channel. Okay. Um, okay, so was that the first one? Is there anything else you want to add before I ask questions?
Um, no, I think that's a good place to start. Like I said, there was a bunch of stuff that kind of happened when I was a kid, but nothing
Mhm.
that was the most profound. That was kind of, I would
Well,
say, that was the real beginning.
well, mention at least one or two things, because I mean, I feel like as children, most children have these experiences because we're still connected to the other side, like we're just fresh out, you know. So, what would you, if you can give a few examples of what happened as a child that you think was out of the norm?
So one of my earliest memories is riding in the car. Um, I come from kind of a big family. There were five of us kids, and then my mom and dad. So we were all. I'm not entirely sure where we were going, but we were riding in the car, and I had basically an out of body experience, except that it was as if I went through space and time. It's not like I was outside of my body looking at my body. I and I didn't have the words for it because I was only a few years old. But at the same time, I very much knew that I was way beyond my body, way beyond the vehicle that we were in, and just hanging out in another place, which at this point I know is just another dimension. And almost as quickly as I felt myself, it was almost um, like a spring had sprung, like my consciousness had sprung into another dimension, and then the spring came back in on itself, and I was right back in the vehicle. And I was kind of shocked to be back. And I looked around, and I wanted to ask everyone if they had experienced the same thing. But as soon as the thought came to me, I knew they weren't going to have any I was trying to express. So
Yeah, I just realized if you're coming from a very strict Christian background, they might have started throwing some holy water at you.
right. So thankfully, I kept it to myself, even though it was very confusing, but at the same time, it was so real for me. And I kind of had that feeling throughout childhood, like how how is it that everyone must have these kinds of thoughts and feelings and experiences, but at the same time, I knew that they didn't, and it was just so strange to me that they didn't. Um, another moment I had uh, years later. So I think I just had this out of nowhere, just this profound, um, this awareness for a moment, of just realizing that I was actually having this experience. It was just it's hard to describe in words, but all of a sudden I just became very aware that I was alive, and that I was um, having the experience that was unfolding around me, and that it was very much a part of me, and I was very much a part of it. And again, I wanted to try and communicate this to my brothers who were sitting there with me, but I knew that they would have no idea what I was trying to explain to them, right? And um, so there were a lot of moments like that growing up, just those strange, they didn't last very long. I would kind of go right back to being um, just kind of falling back into the routine of growing up. But but they always made me pause and wonder, and I would reflect on them at times. And then as I got older, as I had these more profound experiences, it all started to make sense. I started to realize that um, that's really what I came here for, and these were little glimpses into that. It was kind of leading up to the the ultimate, the more profound moments of the awakening, of breaking through, um, and blooming into into realizing, what we really are, and the greater purpose of what we're doing here.
So what I like about this, and this is why I wanted to do STEs, is that this is going to show people that this is much more common than we think. You
Oh,
know, granted, you were one, it was like 1 out of 5, like maybe that's the ratio who are having these experiences, but you never know. You might go back and talk to your brothers, and they might have had similar situations as well that they didn't like. Whereas you stopped and really said, "What is this?" Because if somebody is more stuck into the dogma of religion, they might not have that pause. They might just let that moment go by, you know?
right.
So I think as more people come out of the spiritual closet and kind of are telling their stories, more people are going to be like, "Oh, okay, I had that too." I just thought it was weird, and they just kind of throw it away.
Absolutely.
So
You're 100% correct.
yes. And I, as a child, also had an OBE. So to me, that's that kind of like that first step. It's like once you know that you're not the body, it opens up a million doors. You can understand when people are having NDEs and all these other experiences, whereas somebody who's never had any spiritual experience is kind of like, this is all made up. It's all in your head. Like they can't even fathom that this
Right.
could be reality. Whereas again, if you're looking down at your body, that moment that happens, you're like, okay, this is not what I thought it was. this is
Right.
this is a game changer,
Yeah.
you know. And so I guess one of the questions that I had for you is, what do you think the purpose is of these awakenings? Like, why are we asleep?
So that was one of the first things I kind of had to reckon with once I realized, what had happened and what was going on. Um, so I think the best analogy that I have, and I know I keep referencing it, but it's just like a seed. So so imagine that what we come from is like some kind of plant, like a tree, some sort of massive, um, piece of nature. And even though trees keep on living for a very long time, they're still constantly spreading seeds. It's not like they're going to go anywhere anytime soon necessarily, but they still want to have more of them around. They know that more of them is good and necessary and part of this experience. And we come from something very similar. Um, in fact, pretty much exactly the same, just on a much grander scale. And in order for that to spread, that which we come from, um, seeds have to be planted. That's the best way I can explain it. And so, what happens with a seed? It gets into the ground where it's dark, and it comes up out of the ground, but it doesn't necessarily understand what's going on. I mean, if we were underground and it was dark, we might know that we need to get out of the ground, but we wouldn't necessarily understand why or why we were even in the ground in the first place. But that's kind of the reality of the situation, is that we would have to come up out of it, out of the darkness, or whatever you would want to call it, which is actually what we would be growing in, or where we'd be starting, and then we would eventually get to a point where we were just like what we came from. And that's exactly what happens in nature, with everything that we see in nature, whether it's animals or plants, starting out as something that is relatively irrecognizable, at least does not seem to be what it came from, at least at first, and then eventually it does grow up to be that, what it came from.
Okay. So with that said, I'm liking this analogy of like the trees and the flowers, and it kind of mirrors what I was talking about with my last guest, in regards to, I guess, source. That's what a lot of people are now starting to call God. And I was trying to explain to him that I wrote a book in 2008, and the thing that initiated that whole book was I kept hearing source. Like I kept hearing that. I'm like, what does that mean? Source one, you know? And so that's why I use the term as well, because I feel like it was something that was being handed to me, you know? And so the idea that whereas we could be like these robots, kind of just doing as this entity or this power wants us to do, instead now it's kind of like let's give these seeds, you know, I guess you would call us, let's give these seeds or these children or whatever the ability to think on their own, to make their own decisions, and so on and so forth. But you can't, I mean, it would be pure chaos. And I mean, as it is, we're already living in chaos, but pure chaos if you just took the seeds and kind of like, there was no rhyme or reason to it, just like kind of scattered them everywhere, you know? So it seems like it is a very, it's very structured in some ways. Like it looks like it's just free and wild and everything, but there does seem to be a structure from what I've gathered from people's experiences on the other side in the astral realms, in books and scriptures. It seems like there is some level of structure, in whatever this is that we are in. Like the fact that there are realms, the fact that there are dimensions, like it seems very methodical in some ways. There's people who even say, I have a video coming up soon where they're talking about the different dimensions, the levels of dimensions, So it's like on one hand it's wild and free, but on the other hand it's very calculated. It's like some kind of weird balance, yin yang there. But in your analogy, or what your first off, where are you getting your ideas? I want to understand if it's something that you're just gathering through text and through people's experiences, or knowings, like, so where are you gathering, since you came from a Christian background and you now have something different, where are you getting these ideas? And with this idea, how do you see us in regards or in comparison to the original tree or seed?
um, so I guess to answer your first question, so I've definitely become an eclectic philosopher, I guess you could say. Um, I forget where I first heard that term, but I really latched onto it. Um, I'll listen to or read almost anything at least once at this point, and so I definitely circled back, and I came to find a new appreciation um, for what can be found in the Bible. I think there's a lot of, if you can look at it with open eyes, and without a lot of the dogma or the rhetoric or the agenda that might be floating around, I think there's um, a lot of really good truth in there. But I think that could be said about probably every religious text. There's a lot of great stuff in the Quran. There's a lot of great stuff in the Vedas and the old, the sutras, the Buddhist sutras. There's a lot of great stuff that's been written, and I would say probably every faith, um, the Kabbalistic traditions of Judaism. There's too much to mention. I guess the Baha'i faith has a lot of great stuff in it. I think there's a lot of great stuff, and that's what religion came from a lot of that great stuff, and then over time, different viewpoints and fear gets mixed in, and things get misinterpreted. So, but I'll read almost anyone's opinion on anything regarding this kind of stuff. So I'm constantly, stuff will pop up in in my news feed, or YouTube is great. There's tons of great stuff on YouTube. So whenever there's time or something interesting pops up, I love listening to what's available. So much of what people view as spirituality is, not to say that there isn't spiritual truth to life, but so much of it is being proven scientifically too. And I love reading about the different scientific developments and theories being proven as far as how things happen energetically and on a quantum level, and it really explains so much of what people believe on a spiritual level, or even things in various religious traditions that seem confusing could be explained with an unbiased scientific breakdown. So, like I said, I'm pretty eclectic when it comes to the information that I resonate with. But at the same time, I mean, I feel like we've all got our own internal kind of truth detector, stuff that makes sense to us. And I think it's important that everyone trusts their gut, and you got to do the gut check. If something doesn't make sense to you, or you don't vibe with it, then maybe it's not for you, maybe it's not the right time. But I'm a big believer that everyone's got their own information too, that's that they're ready for, and that's ready to come from them, whether it's writing or speaking, or stuff they want to create. And I've already forgotten the other part of your question.
No problem. But I just want to quickly say that I love that you said everybody has, you know, what I mean, if it's not right for them, or it's just not the right time. Very important to say that it's not the right time, because I know for me, like when I was in a certain place, like religiously, when people were saying certain things, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, just no, just way over like my head. Like, what do you? I don't understand. And then years later, I'm like, oh my God, I get it.
Mhm.
You have that aha moment. You realize, wow, okay, so there might have been some truth to that, you know? Especially when people were talking about aliens in the Bible and this and that. And now, I mean, you can see that there's a lot of major YouTube channels talking about the connection with that. And before I was just like, what? Like, what are you guys on? Like, what are you on? What are you on? Because this is crazy. But it's like, oh, okay, this makes sense. But the other part of my question was, so how do you, so I can understand where you stand now, where do you see us in comparison to the creator that that which created us, or the creator of all? Like, I just understand where you stand on all that.
um so an, another Alan Watts quote, because I love a lot of his stuff. So he said that, just the same way that an apple tree apples, the same way that an apple tree grows apples, the universe peoples, the universe grows people. And so the apple is the apple tree, and then it falls, and the seeds eventually go into the earth, and more apple trees come from it. um, I I feel like we're the same thing, where we've come up out of the universe out of life, and we are another step in its evolution. And we've got that possibility for great consciousness and great awareness of what we are and where we are. And we're very creative beings, or at least we can be when we put our minds to it. And we're great at exploring outside and inside. And I mean, just look at what's being discovered out in the far reaches of space, and so many things that we thought we knew, we're learning even more about them that are creating even more profound theories of what this universe is actually doing. So I guess
So is the universe the begin all for you then in that I'm just trying to wrap my mind around what you understand and what you believe. So in your analogy, there was never a beginning tree. It's just the universe is created. Maybe the universe created the first tree, and then it started, that whole process or something, that whole cycle. So in your mind, the universe is the source. That is the energy, I guess. Is what I'm understanding.
that's a good way to say it. Yeah. I mean, so the universe is infinite, and I don't know if that can necessarily be proven by scientific means. I feel like it's coming to that, or maybe it's come as close as it can come to that. But infinity, by definition, can't have a beginning, and there's no end. It just stretches out forever, and it's that's one of the reasons I like the analogy of a tree or something out of nature. Just like that, the age-old question of the chicken and the egg, what came first? Because you couldn't have one without the other, right? The same thing with anything in nature. You couldn't have an oak tree without an acorn. Couldn't have that acorn without the oak tree. And like I said, I think science has come pretty far, especially in the realm of things like quantum physics, showing that it doesn't, to try and break down time and space enough to say when things would have actually began, how they would have begun. It kind of gets messy when you're trying to look at things on that level. There is a point where you could say, well, it looks like maybe things started at this point in time, but it's hard to prove that. And I think it's hard to prove that because it's not entirely true. I think there's truth to it, just like the beginning of a tree would be that seed. But at the same time, you've got to trace it back to, but what happened before that and before that.
Yeah.
And I think what we could go back and see as the Big Bang is just a step in the process. I don't think that's where things maybe
Wow.
started in the viewpoint of how the Earth got to where it is and how we came up out of the Earth. But the Big Bang would have had to happen from something, and whatever that happened from would have had to happen from something.
Yes,
And
yes.
what that happened from, as far as I see it and feel it, is right now. As much as right now happened from that, and what's going to happen next came from this, but what's happening right now is
It's a mind twister.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
it really is. But here's what I love. So, and if I say something that's completely wrong, I'm telling you, I have no shame. I don't care. Just be like, nope, you're wrong. And I'm just gonna laugh. So be okay with saying that, because as I'm listening to you, what I'm seeing, what I'm perceiving, and you can say again that I'm completely wrong and I've gotten this completely off the track, is that you are spiritual. You had this spiritual awakening. But I feel like you're balancing or trying to balance, because you went from really strict dogmatic Christian, which a lot of people like they run from. Like if you come from that, and I understand, run from, and you don't want, and I like that you said a few minutes ago that there were some good things in the Bible. So that to me shows a level of maturity when it's something that you're kind of running from, but you say, okay, it might have some truth to it. That is a big step. People don't realize that. You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, you know? I know Dolores Cannon says that a lot, and I totally understand what she's meaning by that. You can't just throw it all away. Like there's something in it, you know. And I have to remind myself of that with my, you know, where I came from and my religious background as well. That there's beauty in everything, like you said, in every one of the religions. There's some morsel of truth. But it sounds like you got that spiritualism that came from these experiences and knowing who you are and what you are, and at the same time you're I feel like you don't want to say God, like that's like you're like no.
Oh no, I'm happy to say God.
Oh, okay. See, I'm wrong. But so I was thinking like, okay, I feel like he doesn't want to make that energy into an entity, which is fine because I mean there are people who say it's an energy. It literally that God source whatever created everything is actual just energy. And that scientifically, at the very least, I think they'll be able to come to that conclusion. You know, I do think that that is something that we all can kind of come together and say, okay, it's energy. Even with the Big Bang, they say it was all this energy and it, you know. So, so yeah, I just feel like maybe there's because even Alan Watts, like I sometimes gets pulled in, and if anybody knows who Alan Watts is, and if you don't check out his lectures, you get pulled in. Like you just want to like listen to 5 seconds of it, and then you're just like 2 hours later, you're like,
Yeah,
he is so good at just drawing it out, you know. And it's not like somebody who talks for 2 hours and you just leave. Like you actually get stuck in it and say, I sat there for 2 hours. like, so, but I don't know that he and you can correct me here because I'm as much as I listen to him, I don't really know fully a lot about him. I don't know him to be. I know he's not religious. Like he can't I don't think he was religious. But did he believe in a believing like a creator, like a creator of all, like, or was he more like scientific with it? Like a what would you say were his beliefs overall?
uh, so it's interesting because he was religious for a time, and then he had his own, I guess you could say, awakening. He was actually a priest for a little while, um, and then he, to paraphrase him, he had his own. Um, he had his own uh, kind of, I guess, face to face um, with the the truth of our nature, where he came to realize that the way that he explained it is that um, the realization that Jesus had and that Buddha had, um, that we are life itself. Um, that's the realization that we're all going to have, and that's really what set him off on his writing journey and his speaking tours. Um, One of his most famous lectures was titled "You Are It," and there's multiple versions of it on YouTube. Uh,
Mm.
when he said "it," he meant God.
Mm.
Explained that in many ways, many times. Um, this consciousness, this conscious experience that we're all having, in the way that it unfolds and it expands, in his mind, that's God, or at the very least, that's in our incarnation. That's how we're going to experience it.
Mm.
And once we're done with this human incarnation, then we're going to continue to have an expanding consciousness, expanding awareness. Uh, the experience doesn't stop; it just continues and it grows and it evolves. And that's why a lot of people are drawn to what he speaks about, because I think it resonates with a lot of people. On Probably a lot of people don't even entirely understand at first why they resonate with it, but I think it's because a lot of people are realizing that to be alive, to be conscious, aware, to have this experience. It's more than meets the eye.
Oh
And
yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, because like me, you also are like an NDE connoisseur. Like you've been watching a lot of those, right? Or the near
yeah,
death experiences.
it's for a long time. I read a great book by I believe his name is Eben Alexander, and I feel like that was probably the first experience that I'd read about. Um, at least that one being so profound, and yeah, that really piqued my interest, and I guess continued to keep my interest peaked for a long time.
Mm. And with his, I mean, I wouldn't say yeah, it is profound, but I think the reason why it's so popular is because of what his profession was and is, it gave the experience more credibility, whereas previously when people had these experiences and they told someone or definitely like their doctors or nurses about it, they were just willed away to the crazy house, like literally. There's so many stories, so many NDEs that I've heard about where that happened. Like they would tell their family or the doctors would get upset and then send them straight to the loony bin. One guy spent almost, I forget how many decades, but decades in the crazy house because he told about his NDE. Just imagine, like your whole life is gone because you had an experience. It just shows how this society has not been ready for moving forward until now, right? Um, so, and that's why I always tell people when they share these experiences that, you're really, really brave because we're almost there, like we're getting there, but we're not quite. We're just these are the pioneers that are making it so that people can talk about this and realize this is what's really going on. Now with the idea of us, like of humans being God. Like this, of course, for most religions, like in the Abrahamic faith, is complete blasphemy. Like they will just shut off the the TV the second they hear it, and us, I mean, we're both from those experiences, Abrahamic, religions, so I'm sure we understand that. But there's so many different levels. Like that's one thing I've learned through watching the NDEs, reading different texts and scriptures, etc., and just meditating and going inward and asking my own questions and getting my own answers through life is that um first of everybody has a different experience even with the NDE. Like it's what's one of the questions, like when you really start to research them, you start to realize like how are all these people having different experiences. You would think if I'm getting the story about someone who died and came back, that would be the key, that would be the answer. You would just hear one story and just know exactly what's happening when we die. But the more you go, dive deep, you start saying, okay, wow, they're just as confused as we are. Like I got 10 more questions that came from just watching one video. There are some people who have extremely dogmatic experiences where literally they're walking with Jesus and he's telling him, I like that church, I don't like that group, I'm
Right.
not making that up. There's an NDE like that. And people, like, there was a million comments after it. Like, what are you talking about? That's not Jesus, not my Jesus, you know? So, you have those kind of experiences. And then you have ones where it's like atheists who have extremely, well, some have religious, like they'll be in contact with Jesus and they're almost like, I didn't even know who it was until, I met him type thing. But some that are really just like fragments of colors and lights, and they're going into source light and just all this abstract type situations. But come back while not religious, always spiritual, always feeling that there is a higher power, there is a purpose to all this. So for those, because there have been some, and I've seen it a lot lately, that say we are gods. So there are people who say we are part of source. So in that respect, that yes, we have the capability to be creators. We can create. And again, my last guest was saying that people go to different schools to create planets and this and that. And I've heard that in a lot of things. When you read the books by Michael Newton, Between Life and all those type things, they talk about the things that a soul can do on the other side, and it includes creating. But it doesn't mean, like, it's like if your father was a carpenter and you become a carpenter, it doesn't mean that you're
Right.
you're now your father. Like, Luke, I am your father. you know you know so there's people who have the belief that we have God-like capabilities because we are children of God. So there's that level where somebody would say, I'm a God, but they're meaning it in a different way. And then there's people who like, when they say I am God, they mean it in a way as in like, I'm it. I'm the it. You know, like when you said Alan Watts says you are it, like I'm the it. There's nothing above me. I don't have to answer to anybody. You know, so you have to be very clear because it's like I said, there's levels to it, lots of nuances, you know. And I guess the reason why I say to be clear is because I have friends who went, like myself, went from religious to spiritual. And because it's not something that, and I mean, I could be wrong with what I'm saying here, but like for us, I was able to have this conversation, and she's highly, you know, she's a chemist, highly intelligent, and she also felt this way as well. That when people are saying spiritualism, it's not really a set thing. Like when you say even when you say you're Christian, it's not a set thing nowadays, right? Or even Muslim is not a set thing. But it's even less so when you're saying you're spiritual, right? It's kind of like out there in the wisp. Like what does that mean? Type thing, right? Okay. So because of that, and this is a question I have for you, so I'm going to bring this all into a question. So first, I kind of want to understand what you mean for sure by what you, and I'll repeat the question, so don't worry, forget it. But what you mean by we are God? Like, what does that really, really mean? Is there a being above us that we answer to at some point, or are you saying like, no, it's just that's it? And then as you're raising your children, you were raised in something that was very structured, you know, so that they kind of knew, okay, we go to church, we do this, we da da da. How are you raising your children? Like, what are they believing as they're growing up? What is their experience because of your switch, your change into spiritualism?
So, on the one hand, I think it's important that everyone, I think, so on the one hand, like I was saying before, it it's an evolutionary process. The universe is constantly evolving, constantly expanding. Every element is doing so. I actually just read a great article a couple days about this, how evolution is being redefined. Because a lot of people think of evolution and they think of, okay, well, um, amoebas were the first life forms, you know, single cell organisms, and from that they evolved into multicellular organisms, and eventually they crawled out of the ocean and started walking around on land, and eventually, you know, and it gets to the point where we evolve into what we are today. Um, but if you look at, and then, you know, Darwin came along and did a great job, and people before him did too. And people after him have continued to do a wonderful job. And that's a great example of evolution too, where just the work on evolution is now evolving to encompass other elements that people like Darwin hadn't factored in yet. Minerals are being shown to evolve. So it's not just what we would think of as living things like plants and animals. It's also we see evolution in rocks. We see evolution in molecules on an atomic level, on the macro and the micro. We see evolution across the universe, and we are intrinsically the universe. And like you were saying before, you know, my view on spirituality is yes, we're all spirit. Everything is spiritual, and it's also extremely scientific. God is the most scientific thing that anyone could study because it's everything, and that's what um, quantum physics is. It's literally how connected everything is, and it's so connected that, and I know this probably just sounds so cliche, but everything is so connected that we're blind to it. And that kind of goes back to what you were saying before, as far as, you know, why would we even need to wake up? Well, it's because we're such a complex thing, and our connection is, to say connection means that there must be separation, right? And when the truth of it is that everything actually is one and there is no separation, how could you even perceive that? You could only perceive it through experiencing it. And in order to do that, you would have to perceive yourself, initially anyway, as separate in order to reveal the connectedness of life.
Yes, yes, yes. I'm not gonna say anything. I'm just gonna say yes because I'm getting goosebumps. I'm feeling like hot. Like, okay, keep going, keep going.
So, so at the end of the day, that's the ultimate truth. And it's okay if people aren't there yet. Because literally they aren't there yet in their conscious awareness, in their experience. But at the end of the day, we are all there all the time. It's just a matter of where our attention goes, and where our attention goes is what we're identified with. So when we are identified with, the more we're identified with what God really is, which is love, and that's one of the reasons that I've come to find a new appreciation for things like the Bible or just religious texts in general, because a lot of them do a really good job. Some of them very blatantly, you kind of have to read between the lines, but they do a really good job of explaining some of the core qualities of what we really are, of what God really is. And the easiest way to sum that up is love. Because how could you create anything out of any other emotion? You couldn't, right? Like the way a
Yeah.
baby, and nature does the same thing. It only comes out of love. And so at
But
its
and here's the thing, and I mean I'm getting goosebumps again because like the power of love is just off the charts. Like people really just think about it, it's off the charts. And we don't even experience half of it. If you really listen to a lot of the NDE experiences, they're like, there's nothing even close on this planet, you know? Um, and that's why, as simple as like somebody kind of looking in as your STE, the first one might seem, just being at a point, having that dark night of the soul, being that low and just feeling like, what is the point of this? And then being in surrounded in that level of love, divine love is what I call it. It's one of those things that is like words don't do it justice. Like you can tell us all day about what you experienced, and we'll just be looking at you like, okay, so you felt love. You're like, no, I felt love. like
yeah,
like the love.
the way you say it, not to interrupt you, but
No, go ahead.
the way that it makes sense to me at this point is I realized that that's what I, not just me, but um, on the grander scale, I realized that's what I and all of us actually are. And it's what we come from and it's what we remain. Like I said a moment ago, though, we end up identifying uh, with other facets of life, other elements of creation, which are actually born from love in their own way. Um, but they have their own magnetism to them. They have their own, um, love is vast and deep, and there's different ways to express it. And so there's different ways to feel it. And so even the less desirable aspects of life, things that can bring about feelings of fear or hatred or things that don't quite feel as loving. They're powerful enough to draw our attention to them, and then we end up directing our life based on, even though as a child we knew that love very profoundly, we end up being, to a certain extent, led astray by those other qualities of life that we're also here to explore. And that, I think that kind of brings me back to the other part of your question. So I am a big believer at this point in time. It took me some time to really balance out all these feelings. There was a long time where I just wanted to shake people awake, and I just wanted them to just know the truth, even though I knew from my own experience that it doesn't quite happen that way. Like you said, sometimes it's the dark night of the soul. Sometimes, everyone's experience is a little bit different. Um, Sometimes you just get to that low point where all you can do is let go, and through that letting go, that release, that surrender, then what life actually is able to freely flow. um, and not to say that that's what everyone has to go through in order to get to that point, but that's what many of us go through. which is perfectly okay, and a natural part of letting go and re-identifying with what actually is, what's actually real. Not to say that what people experience on a different level isn't real, but what we really are, what really is true, um, is that infinity that we come from. And I I suppose I've become mature enough to understand that, when you know, and when you're ready to know, then you'll know. But before that, there's no amount of shaking people or pointing things out, or um, not to say that people shouldn't point things out or speak their mind, but at the same time, sometimes the best thing that we can do is just be. And it's taken me a long time to really understand that, and to be that. Sometimes it's okay to be quiet. Um, Not to say that you're not living your truth, or if you feel like something should be said, then maybe that's what needs to be said. But I think it was Ramana Maharshi said that, I'm going to paraphrase so I don't butcher his quote. But he basically said that, silence, true silence, speaks louder than words.